The California sun shone warm and golden over Rodeo Drive, casting long, elegant shadows on marble storefronts and chrome-plated door handles. It was supposed to be a special day for Gloria James, a quiet birthday in Los Angeles, away from the spotlight, just her and her thoughts. At 56, she was still every bit the strong, resilient woman who had once juggled 3 jobs to raise her son in the tough streets of Akron, Ohio. But today wasn't about survival. Today was about celebrating how far she and he had come. She wore what she always wore, simple but elegant. A crisp blouse, soft jeans, low heels. Her hair framed her face in soft waves. She looked good. She felt good. She didn't need a red carpet. She just wanted to buy herself something beautiful. That's when it happened. She stepped toward Luxor, one of the most elite luxury fashion houses in Beverly Hills. Known for its hand-stitched leather bags, custom jewelry, and a clientele list that read like an awards show guest list, it gleamed like a fortress of wealth. Gloria had seen it in magazines. She'd passed it before, always thinking, maybe someday. Today was that day. Or so she thought. Before she could even reach the door, a man in a slim gray suit stepped in front of her. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, eyes scanning her from head to toe. "I'm just looking," she said with a smile. "Thought I'd treat myself for my birthday." The man didn't smile back. "We're by appointment only." Behind him, through the floor-to-ceiling glass, she saw other women browsing, some laughing, others sipping champagne. No appointments, just privilege. "Of course," she said quietly, backing away with the same grace she had carried through every storm in her life. Later that night, she would tell her son what had happened, not to make a scene, not to start a war, just because it hurt. But what LeBron did next? It didn't just address one store's mistake. It rewrote the rules of luxury. What began as a mother's quiet humiliation would soon ignite a movement that made the world pause and rethink what it means to truly belong. The breeze was light that morning in Beverly Hills, the kind that makes palm fronds sway like dancers, and the world feel a little softer. Gloria James stepped out of her black SUV just off Rodeo Drive, the quiet thud of the door closing behind her, breaking the hush of the high-end street. It was her birthday, 56 today. No fanfare, no press, no entourage. Just a day she had carved out for herself, one she rarely took in a life spent lifting others. She had always been more mother than woman, more backbone than ornament. But today, she had promised herself something different. She had raised a son who became a king, but she'd never stopped being the woman who once worked late-night shifts just to keep the lights on. Gloria wasn't looking for anything extravagant, just something beautiful. A small celebration of survival, of strength, of quiet victories. Her outfit was simple, a soft cream blouse tucked into dark jeans, the kind of denim you save for special days. Her shoes were sensible, elegant. Her gold hoops caught the sunlight, modest but polished. Her hair was perfectly set, curls falling in graceful frames around her face. She walked with a posture that came from knowing who she was, not needing to announce it. The stores lining Rodeo gleamed like palaces. She passed them slowly, peeking in windows, letting herself imagine. At one storefront, she paused. It was called Luxor, one of the crown jewels of the avenue. Discreet gold lettering across the marble exterior, no loud signage, no sales racks, just quiet opulence. She had read about it, seen the photos. Beyoncé shopped there. So did actresses, European royals, CEOs with names she couldn't pronounce. For years, she had walked past stores like this without stopping. That day, something told her. Why not? Not because she needed to prove anything, just because she could. She stepped forward. The doors were glass, heavy and spotless. Inside, the store was all white walls and golden light. Displays like art galleries, bags with price tags that didn't need numbers. Just names. Prestige. A woman was being handed a flute of champagne near the perfume wall. A man tried on a coat that probably cost more than Gloria's first apartment. She was almost to the door when he stepped out. The doorman wore a slim gray suit, his tie a perfect half-Windsor knot. His face was handsome, almost too symmetrical, like something from a luxury cologne ad. His eyes scanned her with speed and precision, pausing on her shoes, her blouse, her lack of labels. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, his tone smooth but laced with something cooler. "May I help you?" "I'm just looking," Gloria answered, offering a polite smile. "Thought I'd treat myself today. It's my birthday." He didn't smile back. "I'm sorry," he said, adjusting his cuff. "We're currently by appointment only." She glanced past him. The woman drinking champagne was laughing. A young couple was pointing at a display near the back. No one looked rushed. No one looked like they had an appointment. "Oh," Gloria said softly, still trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. "I didn't realize." "That's all right." His face was carved from marble. "Perhaps one of the boutiques around the corner would be more accessible," he said, eyes flickering back to her clothes. "There's a lovely shop near the Beverly Wilshire. More relaxed." There it was, the message wrapped in fake courtesy. She didn't belong. Not here. Not dressed like this. Not with skin like hers. Not without diamonds or an assistant holding her purse. Gloria didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice or ask for a manager. She just nodded. "Thank you," she said, turning away with the same quiet grace that had carried her through every moment life tried to knock her down. The wind was picking up now. Her curls moved slightly in the breeze as she walked back toward her car, her heels clicking softly on the sidewalk. She passed the other windows without looking. Her reflection in the glass seemed smaller now, not physically, but in spirit. When she reached her car, she opened the door, sat down in the driver's seat, and closed it gently behind her. Only then did she allow herself a moment. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Her eyes didn't water, but her breath caught. It wasn't the first time the world had tried to shrink her, but somehow it still stung. She stared straight ahead, the luxury storefronts blurring behind her windshield. Then she reached for her phone. She wasn't going to yell. She wasn't going to rant. She was just going to tell her son. Because sometimes even queens need their kings. The text came in just after noon, while LeBron James was in the middle of a photo shoot for a new campaign. He glanced at the screen between takes. It was from his mom. "Nothing urgent, just a funny birthday story. Call me when you get a second." He smiled at first. Gloria James wasn't one to make a big deal out of her birthday. She never had been. When LeBron was little, she'd skip it altogether, too busy making sure he had what he needed to care much about cake and candles. Even now, with her son a global icon, she still kept things simple. That was just her style. He didn't think much of the message. Not at first. But a few hours later, when he finally sat down in his trailer and called her, it didn't take long to realize this wasn't just some funny story. Not really. "Hey, birthday girl," he said as her face popped up on his screen. She was sitting in her car, the LA sun casting a sharp light across the windshield. "You treat yourself today?" Gloria gave a half smile, the kind that tried to hide something behind it. "I tried," she said. "Did a little walking around rodeo. Just wanted to buy myself something small. Nothing crazy." LeBron leaned forward, picking up on the tone. "What happened?" She waved it off, but only for a moment. She was never one for drama, but she was honest, and her son had always been able to tell when something wasn't sitting right. "I went into that place, Luxor, or I guess I tried to." LeBron frowned. "The fancy leather spot?" "That's the one," she said. "Saw it in a magazine last year. Always thought it looked beautiful." She paused. He waited. "The doorman didn't let me in." There was a long silence on the line. LeBron didn't speak. His face didn't change, but something inside him stilled. "What do you mean he didn't let you in?" he asked. "He said it was by appointment only," Gloria replied, her voice even, calm. "But there were people inside, customers, browsing, laughing. I saw them through the glass." LeBron's jaw tightened. "Did you say anything?" "No," she said. "What was I gonna say? I wasn't trying to start a scene. I just thought I'd walk in, buy a little bracelet or a wallet and call it a day." She laughed then, but it was thin, hollow. "He told me there was another place around the corner that might be more my style." LeBron exhaled sharply. He wasn't angry, not yet, but something deep in his chest began to stir. It wasn't about money, not for him, and it definitely wasn't about image. This was about something else, something older, something raw. "Did he know who you were?" he asked quietly. "No," she said, "and that's the thing, Bron. That's what made it worse, because this wasn't about me being your mom. It was just about me, a woman in nice jeans and a birthday blouse who didn't look expensive enough to walk through the door." There was a pause. "And you know what? That hurt more." LeBron sat back, his face unreadable. His mother had never asked for anything. Not when he was a kid sleeping on friends' couches. Not when she worked 2 jobs and still found time to help him with homework. Not when he made his first $1,000,000 or his first $100,000,000. She didn't want the world to hand her anything. But she deserved to be treated with dignity. Always. "You okay?" he asked softly. "I'm fine, baby," she said. "Just needed to tell someone. Figured I'd laugh about it later. Just felt strange, that's all. Strange that I still don't look like I belong. Even now." LeBron didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted toward the floor, then out the window of the trailer where makeup artists were packing up their kits. The world outside was moving. Cameras, assistants, producers. But inside, something was standing still. He remembered being 15. Seeing his mom cry over a rent notice, remembered her working nights, coming home with aching feet, remembered swearing silently that one day he'd make sure no one ever made her feel small again. That day had come and gone, over and over, and yet, here they were again. This wasn't about a purse, it wasn't about a store, it was about the door that didn't open, and what he'd have to do to make sure it never closed for someone like her again. The bell above the door didn't chime, because there was no bell. No cheerful sound, no welcoming tone, just thick glass doors, so pristine they looked like they belonged to a bank vault, not a boutique. The kind of doors you needed to earn your way through, not just walk into. Gloria James stood on the sidewalk, the warm California sun pressing down on her shoulders as if it, too, were waiting to see what she'd do next. The store ahead, Luxor, looked less like a place that sold handbags and more like a private gallery. The name alone sounded like something whispered behind velvet ropes. She checked her reflection in the window, smoothing a hand over her blouse. Her hair was freshly done, her makeup subtle but thoughtful. She looked good. She looked proud. She looked like someone who had come a long way from where she started. A couple walked out of the store just then. Young, stylish. The woman was in an oversized blazer and chunky designer heels. The man in streetwear that probably cost more than most people's rent. They laughed as they passed her, one of them clutching a thin black shopping bag with the Luxor gold crest stamped in the center. The door hadn't been locked for them. Gloria stepped forward. Before her hand could even graze the polished metal handle, a man appeared from the right. Late 30s, tall, dressed in a tailored gray suit that clung to his body like it had been sewn there. His shoes gleamed. His smile didn't. "Good afternoon," he said, stepping between her and the door. She blinked, caught a little off guard. "Hi," she said politely. Just wanted to look around. It's my birthday." The man's eyes moved the way a scanner moves, quick, calculating. They lingered on her earrings, her shoes, the way her bag lacked any obvious logo. "I'm terribly sorry," he said, voice low and practiced, "but we're actually by appointment only today." Gloria's brow furrowed slightly. "Oh, really? I didn't see a sign." "There isn't one," he said quickly. "It's selective. You understand." His voice dropped on that last line, a tone that was both apologetic and cold. Not cruel, but clear. "This isn't for you." She glanced over his shoulder into the store. She could see at least 4 people browsing freely. 2 women by a jewelry case, a man examining belts, a sales associate showing someone a leather clutch. Laughter floated faintly through the glass. Appointments apparently didn't apply to them. "Oh," she said softly, "I see. If you're looking for something more accessible," he continued, "there's a wonderful little boutique a few blocks over, right near Wilshire. Much more relaxed." There it was again. Relaxed. The code word. Not for comfort, but for affordability. For where you should be. Where you belong. Gloria smiled then. A smile that held no humor. A smile she had worn before. In offices, banks, lobbies. A smile that said, "I know what this is, but I won't give you the satisfaction of seeing it land." "Thank you," she said. She turned. The man, whose name she didn't catch, and who didn't ask for hers, stepped back to his post by the door, one hand adjusting his cufflink, the other resting lightly at his waist, guarding the gate. Gloria walked away, her steps even and unhurried. She could feel her heartbeat, though. Not from embarrassment, not even from anger, but from a deep, old ache. A familiar one. The kind that lived in her bones, that had settled there from years of moving through spaces where she had to prove her worth before she was seen. As she reached the corner and pressed the crosswalk button, a breeze lifted the hem of her blouse. She caught it with one hand, holding it down. 56 years old. She had survived poverty, raised a son into a legend, watched herself become the matriarch of a legacy most people could only dream of. And yet, here she was, still on the wrong side of a door that wouldn't open. When the light changed, she crossed the street, never once looking back. Not because it didn't matter, but because it did. She just refused to let it define her. Again. The sidewalks on Rodeo Drive always felt like a different kind of stage. Not the kind with lights or microphones, but the kind where every step you took seemed to echo a little louder if you didn't belong. Gloria James walked slowly now, her heels clicking rhythmically against the pristine pavement. The kind of walk that wasn't meant to be noticed, but still somehow was, not because of what she wore, not because of who she was, but because the street had a way of deciding who was worth seeing. She passed storefronts with names embossed in gold, each one gleaming like it had been cut from the sun. The window displays were curated like museum exhibits, dresses that shimmered without moving, handbags posed like trophies. For a moment, she watched a young woman in a silk jumpsuit walk out of a boutique with 2 associates trailing behind her, one carrying bags, the other holding a phone to her ear. No one stopped her. No one asked questions. Gloria adjusted her purse on her shoulder. Her phone buzzed, but she didn't check it. She needed the quiet. Or maybe the quiet needed her. There was a stillness around her now. Not the kind you enjoy, but the kind that fills a space after something has been taken from it. Her car was parked a few blocks down, near a small side street where parking wasn't impossible. She had chosen to walk today. The sunshine had seemed like an invitation when she first stepped out of the hotel. She'd thought about lunch at that little cafe near Camden. Maybe browsing a few shops. Maybe spoiling herself a little. Something new for her birthday. Not because she needed more things, but because After all this time, she could. Now, her steps felt heavier. She passed a couple seated at an outdoor table, laughing over matching espresso cups. A man in designer sneakers walked by, scrolling on his phone, sunglasses too large for his face. Behind her, a Rolls-Royce idled, its driver standing just beside it in a suit, eyes hidden behind dark lenses. No one looked at her, but she could feel it anyway. That soft buzz of exclusion. It didn't scream. It didn't need to. It whispered. It was in the way people didn't make space on the sidewalk, in the way no sales associate came out to greet her, in the way that, minutes earlier, a man in a perfect suit had decided she wasn't the kind of woman who belonged in that kind of store. Not today. Not ever. Gloria kept walking. Her memories drifted as her feet moved. She thought of the old bus stop back in Akron, where she used to wait with young LeBron, bundled in a too-thin coat, trying to pretend he wasn't cold. She thought of the grocery store where she once had to put back a loaf of bread because the total came out to 8 cents more than she had in her pocket. Back then, there were no luxury stores, no grand avenues, just days you survived and days you didn't. And yet somehow, the sting of today still managed to reach her. Because it wasn't about money. Not really. It was about being made to feel small. Again. She reached her car and stood beside it for a moment before unlocking the door. The chrome handle felt hot beneath her fingers. She slid inside, gently pulled the door shut, and stared straight ahead. The air was thick and still, the kind of quiet that pressed against your chest. She didn't cry. She didn't curse. She just sat. Her phone buzzed again. A text from LeBron, no doubt. She would answer soon. Not yet. Gloria looked at herself in the rearview mirror. Her lipstick was still in place. Her curls framed her face just the way she'd wanted them to when she left that morning. But something behind her eyes had shifted. A small betrayal, not of who she was, but of how she had hoped to feel today. And still, she breathed deep. She started the engine, pulled gently out of the space, merged with the traffic flowing through the heart of Beverly Hills, because that's what she'd always done, kept moving, even when the world told her to stop. LeBron was on a break when she finally called. Not a real break, not the kind where you sit back and breathe, but a gap between meetings, just long enough to catch his breath before jumping into the next one. His phone buzzed again, and this time, he didn't let it go to voicemail. "Hey, Ma," he said, lifting the phone to his ear, stepping away from the group of advisors discussing a new initiative for his foundation. Her voice came through steady, but low, not quite her usual rhythm. "Hey, baby, you busy?" He heard it right away. That something in her tone, not sadness, not anger, just a quiet weight behind the words, like a bag she'd been carrying all day. "I got a minute," he said, already finding a corner of the room to sit down. "What's going on?" There was a pause. Not hesitation. Just her choosing her words carefully, as she always did when she didn't want to burden him, but felt like she needed to anyway. "I had a little moment today," Gloria said. "Nothing big, just something that kind of caught me off guard." LeBron didn't interrupt. He knew his mom. You let her talk when she needed to. You let the words come the way she needed them to. "I went out this morning," she continued. "Thought I'd spoil myself a little. Rodeo Drive. You know, just one of those birthday things." He smiled softly. "As you should." "Yeah, well," she said, exhaling lightly. "I walked up to this store, Luxor. You ever heard of it?" He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Yeah, they got a spot in Miami too. Real high-end, leather everything." "Well, I didn't get far," she said. "Didn't even make it through the door." He sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" "They had a man at the door," she said. "Real polished. Looked like he'd ironed his soul that morning. He took one look at me and decided I wasn't the right kind of customer. Her voice remained calm, but her words were sharp in the way only truth can be. Told me it was appointment only, but I saw people inside, Bron, not celebrities, just folks, dressed differently than I was. He felt it then, that slow, tightening burn in his chest. It didn't rise all at once. It simmered, settled in the pit of his stomach like something familiar. Too familiar. He told me, she went on, that there was a more relaxed store I might enjoy, down the block. LeBron closed his eyes. "You know what the worst part was?" Gloria asked, softer now. "It wasn't the man. It wasn't even the door not opening. It was that feeling, that old feeling. Like I was back in Akron, walking into a place I couldn't afford, praying no one would look at me too long. That kind of shame I thought I'd buried a long time ago." Silence stretched between them. Then she added quietly, "I'm 56 today. 56. And I still feel like I have to earn the right to be treated like I matter." LeBron opened his eyes and looked out the window. The city moved beneath him. Cars, billboards, people rushing in and out of places with no idea what kind of weight was being carried inside the quiet of a phone call. "You do matter," he said finally, his voice thick. "You hear me? You always have." "I know, baby," she said. "I do. I needed to tell someone. That's all. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just tired of pretending it doesn't get to me sometimes." He swallowed hard. There was a photo of her on his desk back home, holding him in her lap, barely 24 years old, wearing an oversized sweatshirt and the same tired eyes that still had more fight in them than most people would in a lifetime. "You did everything for me," he said quietly. "You opened doors for me when there were none. So maybe now it's my turn." "Bron," she started, but he cut her off gently. "No, Ma, let me say this. That man didn't know who you were, but he's about to." She laughed, a small, tired sound. "Don't go making a scene now." "I'm not making a scene," he said. "I'm making a point." He could already feel the wheels turning, his mind scanning through names, contacts, real estate firms, because this wasn't about retail. This was about respect. And if the world still didn't understand what that looked like when it walked up to their door in quiet elegance, then maybe he needed to show them. Not through noise, but through change. One door at a time. And the call ended, but LeBron didn't move. The phone was still in his hand, screen gone dark, resting against his knee, as the weight of his mother's voice echoed through his thoughts. He sat there in silence, his 6'9" frame folded onto a bench in the corner of a modern glass-walled studio, surrounded by quiet conversations and soft clicking camera shutters. No one noticed him withdraw. He had learned how to disappear in plain sight when he needed to think. And right now, he needed to think. Gloria hadn't cried. She never did, not in front of him. That was her gift, and her curse. She wore strength like skin, always had. Even when she couldn't afford groceries, even when they had to borrow heat, even when she walked to work in a Cleveland winter with wind that cut through layers like knives, she never let it show. But today there had been something in her voice. Not weakness, not pain, just disappointment. And somehow, that was worse. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and let himself drift back. Not to the arenas, not to the lights or the press conferences, but to the hallway of their old apartment in Spring Hill, the walls so thin you could hear the neighbors arguing 3 doors down. Back to the carpet that didn't quite reach the walls, the refrigerator that hummed louder than the TV, and the shoes that didn't always fit, but had to. He remembered his mother coming home after a double shift at a diner, uniform still smelling like fryer oil, face lined with exhaustion, feet swollen from 12 hours of standing. She never sat down right away. First, she made sure he had eaten, made sure his homework was done, made sure his dreams were still intact, even when hers were being quietly packed away. And he remembered the time she cried. He had been 10. They were at a department store, the kind that smelled like new plastic and stale perfume. Gloria had saved for weeks to buy him a pair of basketball shoes, his first real pair, the ones he'd cut out of magazines and taped to his wall. He had picked them up like they were gold, cradled them in his arms like something sacred. But when they reached the counter, she came up short. Just a few dollars. She pulled a second card from her wallet. Declined. The woman behind the register didn't smile, didn't pretend to understand. Just shook her head and reached for the box. LeBron never forgot the way his mother's fingers gripped the edge of the counter that day, as if holding on to that laminated surface could stop the entire world from collapsing around her. They left without the shoes. She didn't cry in the store. But that night, after he had gone to bed, he heard her. Just a few soft sobs from behind the bathroom door. The kind a child doesn't forget. Not ever. That moment had stayed with him through everything. Through the high school gymnasiums packed with scouts, through the NBA draft, through the championships, the endorsements, the fame. He didn't talk about it, didn't need to, but it lived in him. It fueled him. Because it wasn't about shoes. It was about being told you weren't enough, that you didn't belong, that the world would only open its arms if you looked the part. And now, decades later, they were still at that same door. Different city, different clothes, different day. But the same feeling, the same dismissal. Only now it wasn't about a kid with a dream. It was about the woman who had built him. He stood up slowly, shoulders square, eyes sharp. Something in him had shifted. Not anger, not yet, but a kind of focus that rarely missed its mark. He wasn't going to call the store. He wasn't going to shame a doorman or post a headline. That wasn't his way. He was going to build something. Something that didn't just open doors for his mother, but for every mother, every teacher, every nurse, every person who'd ever been told without words that they didn't look the part. He walked out of the studio and into the LA sunlight, his team trailing behind him, asking where he wanted to head next. He didn't look back, just said, "Find out who owns Luxor," and kept walking. The sun was setting over the hills when LeBron finally made it home. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that wrapped around you like a heavy blanket. His family was out for the evening, his wife taking the kids to dinner, a rare pocket of calm in their whirlwind of a schedule. But he wasn't in the mood for company anyway. Not tonight. He walked through the foyer, past framed jerseys, past family photos in silver frames, and sat down on the edge of the couch, like he wasn't sure he meant to stay there. The light outside was golden now, casting long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Somewhere in the distance, a bird chirped like it didn't know the day was ending. LeBron reached for the remote but didn't turn the TV on. Instead, he just stared at the dark screen and saw something else. Her face. His mother's face. Not from today's call, though that image was still fresh. The way her smile tried to shield the hurt. The way her voice stayed steady even when the world tilted slightly beneath her. No, the face he saw now was younger. Tireder. Her eyes a little more hollow but just as determined. He was maybe 9, maybe 10. They were in the apartment again, before the heat got turned back on, before the fridge was full. He had asked her why they couldn't go to the nice mall, the one with the bright white floors and the music playing from invisible speakers. She had told him gently that places like that didn't always treat people like them the way they should. But why? He had asked, honestly confused. We don't steal. We don't do anything wrong. She had looked at him with something like sorrow and something stronger underneath. It's not about wrong, baby, she had said. Sometimes people just decide who you are before you even open your mouth. That's not your fault. That's theirs. He remembered how that made him feel. Small. Not because of what she said, but because of how true it was. And he remembered what he'd promised her that night, even if he didn't say it out loud. One day, I'll get us into every room they try to keep us out of. That was the beginning of it. Not the career, not the championships. The promise, the unspoken burning need to not just change his own life, but to make sure hers never felt that kind of dismissal again. He had thought for the longest time that he'd done it. The mansions, the private jets, the accolades, the respect. He had thought that somewhere along the way, he'd rewritten the script, made her untouchable, above judgment, above insult. But then came the door at Luxor, the doorman, the lie about appointments, the polite dismissal dressed in tailored suits and empty courtesy. It reminded him that money couldn't always buy access, and that respect, when it's forced, isn't really respect at all. LeBron leaned back against the couch and stared up at the ceiling for a moment, then exhaled slowly. It wasn't about revenge. That wasn't his style. He didn't want apologies. He didn't want headlines. He wanted change. The kind of change that couldn't be undone with a press release or a public statement. He pulled out his phone, opened a blank note, and began typing, not out of impulse, but out of something deeper. A design was forming in his mind. A blueprint. One where doors didn't have to be pushed open or knocked down, but where they were built differently from the start. He thought of the women who looked like his mother, the ones who worked double shifts and still walked tall, the ones who didn't wear designer brands, not because they didn't understand beauty, but because they had prioritized survival. The nurses, the teachers, the bus drivers, the single moms in grocery stores counting coupons while telling their kids they could get one thing, not two. What if they could walk into a place like Luxor and feel seen? What if luxury didn't mean separation? What if it meant excellence, with inclusion? A radical concept. But that was the thing about LeBron. He'd always played a long game. And when he made a promise, he didn't forget it. He hit save on the note, stood up, and headed to his office. Tomorrow, he'd make some calls. Tonight, he remembered who he was doing it for. The morning came quiet and steady, like it always did in Brentwood. Sunlight slid through the windows in thin, golden ribbons, casting soft shadows across the polished hardwood floors of LeBron's home. But inside his office, the calm exterior of the morning didn't match the pace of his thoughts. He sat at his desk, phone on silent, laptop open but untouched. The world outside might have looked still, but in his mind, 100 things were moving all at once. He wasn't pacing, wasn't shouting, wasn't scribbling on whiteboards like in the movies. That wasn't his style. His moves were deliberate, calculated. Every pass, every pivot, every step he'd ever made, on the court or off it, had been planned. Not always in advance, but always with purpose. Now that same focus had turned toward a different kind of arena. He scrolled slowly through his contacts, scanning names that had built industries, owned buildings, shaped entire sectors of fashion and business. People he'd met in green rooms, at charity dinners, on golf courses where deals were made between swings. He had always played the game, but not by shrinking himself. Never that. He had learned to navigate it on his terms, bringing his voice, his people, his story, into rooms that weren't built with him in mind. But this time wasn't about rooms. This time was about doors. Specifically, one door. The one his mother hadn't been allowed to walk through. Not because of who she was, but because of who she wasn't. The image of that moment, her standing outside Luxor, dignity intact, pride bruised, looped in his head like film stuck on a reel. He had spent his whole life trying to build a world where that version of his mother didn't exist anymore. But now it was clear. That world didn't exist yet. So he would build it, piece by piece. He opened a folder on his desktop labeled, simply, 50. Inside, notes were already starting to form. His assistant had pulled ownership records. The building that housed Luxor wasn't owned by the brand itself. It was leased from a multinational holding company with connections in New York, London, and Dubai. The kind of ownership web that stretched across oceans and sat behind tinted glass. No matter. He could untangle it. He made a call.
"Get me the number for Westmore Holdings," he told his team, eyes on the screen. "The real estate group behind 618 Rodeo." There was a pause. "You want to lease the space?" He smiled faintly. "No. I want to own it." When it came to basketball, LeBron had always been praised for his vision. Seeing plays before they unfolded, finding lanes where none seemed to exist. That same clarity had followed him off the court. It's why his businesses thrived. It's why athletes called him for more than advice about training. It's why boardrooms leaned in when he spoke. He didn't just react, he orchestrated. And right now, he was orchestrating something bigger than a store, bigger than his name. This wasn't about flipping the script with a press release or a flashy social media stunt. That would be easy, temporary. This needed to last. He thought about Gloria again, about all the women like her who wouldn't make the news, who would be turned away quietly, kindly, with a smile and a lie. Who would walk back to their cars holding back tears, not because they didn't belong, but because someone else decided they didn't. No more. He made a second call, this one to a designer he respected. Someone who had come up from nothing, just like him. Someone who understood elegance without elitism. They spoke briefly, just a spark of an idea. "What if we redefined luxury?" LeBron said. "What if it wasn't about who we exclude, but how we uplift?" The designer was quiet for a beat. "I'm in," came the answer. A third call, a fourth. By noon, his calendar was filling with meetings. Fashion houses, investment firms, architects, retail strategists, all woven together around a single idea that had begun as a wound, but was quickly becoming a mission. Not to destroy Luxor, but to eclipse it.
By evening, the plan was no longer just in his head. It was in motion. Because when you're LeBron James, you don't just fight for access. You build kingdoms, and then you hold the door open. Inside the sleek white walls of Luxor, everything smelled expensive. The kind of scent that clung to silk and leather, a soft blend of oud and quiet arrogance. The store was spotless, every glass display gleaming, every item perfectly placed. It wasn't just a retail space. It was a gallery of wealth. And the people inside it didn't walk. They glided. Voices were hushed, laughter refined, and nothing was ever out of place, especially not the customers. Behind the counter near the accessories wall, a sales associate named Margot folded a scarf she wasn't allowed to touch without gloves just days earlier. She had worked at Luxor for 6 years, and in that time, she'd learned more about appearances than fashion. Appearances got you in, appearances got you served, and if you didn't look the part, well, you were redirected, discreetly, politely, but absolutely. She remembered the woman from earlier that week, middle-aged, elegant in her own way, but not Luxor elegant. No labels, no bags from other stores to suggest money had already been spent. Just a plain blouse, clean jeans, and calm confidence. She hadn't even stepped inside. Vincent had handled it at the door. As always, Vincent was Luxor's gatekeeper. The store called him guest relations, but everyone else called him what he truly was, the filter. He stood at the front like a doorman from a different era, immaculately dressed, expression unreadable, armed with 1,000 micro-judgments honed to instinct. She didn't have an appointment, he'd said that day, brushing off any questions. But Margot had seen the truth. She'd seen the flicker in the woman's eyes when the door didn't open. Not shock, Not outrage, just quiet disappointment. The kind that came from recognizing an old pattern you thought you'd outgrown. That moment should have passed like all the others, forgotten by closing time. But this one hadn't, because whispers were starting. It began with a headline: LeBron James in talks to acquire Rodeo Drive property connected to incident involving mother. Then another. Did a Beverly Hills store just turn away LeBron's mom? No store name, no confirmed details. But Luxor's staff knew. They knew. By the time the third article dropped, sources say luxury chain may face brand reckoning amid viral rumors. The tension inside the store had changed. Managers were holding closed-door meetings. Corporate sent down an urgent directive about tightening the guest experience. No one said it out loud, but everyone was thinking the same thing. We turned away LeBron James' mother, and now the king was moving. In the back room, behind a polished wood door that most of the staff never entered, the store manager, Renaud, sat in a leather chair that had never felt less comfortable. His phone was buzzing non-stop. The district lead was demanding an updated client list. Legal was asking for security footage. The brand's CEO, usually untouchable, had requested a call that evening to discuss reputation safeguards. "We're exposed," Renaud said aloud, though no one else was in the room. Because the truth was, they weren't just worried about LeBron. They were worried about what this meant, about who else might start speaking up, who else had felt the same thing at this store or others like it, and had kept quiet because they didn't have a platform, because they didn't have a son who could buy the block their rejection happened on. And what if this wasn't a blip? What if this was a beginning? Meanwhile, at the front of the store, Vincent remained still as ever, hands folded neatly in front of him. He had read the stories, too, seen the speculation. His jaw had tightened as the dots connected, as the woman he'd dismissed became more than a memory. He didn't speak about it, not to the other staff, not to management. But something in the way he stood was different now, less certain. He glanced more often toward the entrance, as if expecting someone important to arrive at any moment. And maybe they would, because Luxor had always been about exclusivity, but now it was about exposure. Behind the doors, behind the display cases and the designer labels, the quiet panic was growing. And on the outside, a storm was coming. But not the kind that shattered glass, the kind that changed what it meant to even look through it. The next morning, the espresso machine hissed behind the staff break room wall, but no one moved to claim their mug. The usual clatter of spoons against ceramic, the background chatter of weekend plans and client gossip. It was gone, replaced by something quieter, more electric. Suspicion, curiosity, unease. It buzzed just under the surface like a second heartbeat. The staff of Luxor stood scattered, pretending to scroll through their phones, pretending to fix their uniforms, pretending they didn't already know what each other was thinking. They'd all seen the headlines by now. They didn't say her name, not officially, but the details lined up too neatly to ignore. A woman, mid-50s, turned away at the door of a luxury store in Beverly Hills. No appointment, told to shop elsewhere. And then, a quiet note tucked into every article like a fuse waiting to light. The woman was LeBron James's mother. Nobody had confirmed it. Luxor's management hadn't said a word. But silence, in the luxury world, was never a shield. It was a signal. Something had happened, and it was bad. Vincent hadn't spoken all morning. He arrived earlier than usual, suit crisp, posture tighter than normal, jaw set like stone. But the usual glint in his eye, that air of subtle control he carried with him like cologne, was missing. He avoided everyone's gaze, didn't greet the first two guests, just opened the door, bowed faintly, and stepped back like he wasn't sure how to stand anymore. Margot watched him from the edge of the break room, fingers curled around the handle of a mug she hadn't filled. She said nothing, but her eyes followed every movement. Vincent wasn't someone who rattled. He was trained for discretion, hired for his polish. But today, his silence felt like confession. "He hasn't denied it," whispered one of the newer associates, Serena. Her voice barely carried, but in the stillness, it echoed. If it wasn't her, wouldn't he have said something? "Does it matter?" Margot murmured. They turned to look at her. "I mean, yes," she continued. "Of course it matters. But also, how many other people have we turned away like that? People who didn't have famous kids?" Nobody answered, because the question didn't need one. It was the thing that lived in all of them, the knowing, the silent complicity. Every associate who had followed the unspoken script, every nod of approval when Vincent sized someone up and declared, without saying so, who was welcome and who was not. "That's not our call," Serena said a little too quickly, like she was trying to shove the blame back out the door. "We're told what the image is. We're told who we cater to." "And what about when it's someone's mom?" Margot asked, her voice lower now. "What about when the image misses someone who's already given more to this world than most of us ever will?" The words hung there. Outside the break room, the morning traffic on Rodeo buzzed like nothing had changed. A couple walked past the front windows, pausing to look at the new window display, handbags in a soft lilac, spotlit like art. Inside, the music played low and smooth, like it always did. But everything felt different. By mid-afternoon, the staff had started checking their phones more frequently. News alerts, social media, a video clip of LeBron at a charity event saying nothing but looking like someone with a secret to unleash. "I heard he's trying to buy the building," someone whispered behind a perfume display. "No," another said. "He's buying the whole brand." "That can't be true, can it? I mean, it's LeBron." The idea wasn't laughable. That was the thing. In another world, the rumor would have sounded ridiculous, absurd. But here now, it sounded possible, plausible, even inevitable. Vincent stood near the entrance all afternoon, still composed, still perfectly dressed, but his hands fidgeted. He rubbed his thumb across the edge of his pinky ring again and again, a nervous tick no one had seen before. He knew what they were saying. He could feel the eyes, but he said nothing, because deep down, he wasn't thinking about headlines or brands. He was thinking about her face, the woman in the plain blouse with the proud eyes, the one who said it was her birthday, the one he'd turned away with polished cruelty. And he was wondering if, for the first time in his carefully measured life, he had been wrong in a way that couldn't be fixed with silence. By the time the weekend ended, the story had outgrown whispers. It wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was a movement. The name Luxor trended online for 3 days straight, not for a new product launch or celebrity campaign, but for something quieter and heavier. The kind of story that didn't start with fireworks, but with a closed door and a mother's silence. The kind of story that burrowed its way into the public's imagination and refused to leave. People wanted answers. But more than that, they wanted justice. Not the angry, loud kind with pitchforks and hashtags, but the subtle, powerful kind that could only come from seeing someone rewrite the rules from the inside out. LeBron didn't issue a statement. He didn't call out the store by name. He didn't retweet a single headline. What he did instead was more disruptive. He acted. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Designers flew in. Real estate brokers worked late. Construction consultants and brand strategists were looped into quiet calls with vague NDAs and no clear destination. But those closest to him, his team, his inner circle, knew. He wasn't just planning a response, he was building a reckoning. He'd done it before, with his school, with his foundation, with media, film, business. Every time he saw a space where people like him and his mother had been overlooked, he didn't ask to be let in. He walked around the building and found another way in. Or he bought the whole building. And this time, the vision was crystal clear. Create a luxury brand rooted not in exclusion, but elevation. Something just as beautiful, just as masterfully crafted, but stripped of that smug, invisible smirk that greeted people who didn't wear their wealth on their sleeves. It wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be tacky. There would be no gold-plated apology, no flashy revenge tour. That wasn't the point. This wasn't about making people uncomfortable. It was about making them think. In conference rooms lined with glass and brushed steel, LeBron laid it out for his team. "We're not here to make a better version of Luxor," he said. "We're here to make a better version of the whole idea of luxury." He turned to his creative director, a woman who had grown up in the Bronx, who once sketched gown designs on the backs of math homework. "I want this to feel like walking into confidence. I want people to walk in and feel like they already belong." She nodded slowly, eyes lit with something that looked like possibility. He looked to his business manager. "What's the price point for someone who's never bought luxury before but wants to own something beautiful and meaningful, without feeling like they had to dress up to earn it?" He looked to his logistics guy. "What's it going to take to get a community access program off the ground before launch?" He looked to his assistant. "Who do we call to make sure the first wave of customers includes school teachers, nurses, bus drivers, single parents, people who deserve to be first?" And he looked to himself. Because underneath the brand, the plan, the architecture and marketing, this was still personal. This was still about the woman who raised him in second-hand clothes and unconditional love. This was still about her walking away from a locked door on her birthday, feeling like her story didn't matter in a place where everyone else's did. That moment, the look in her eyes, the restraint in her voice, it had started this fire. And now, it would light the way for something bigger than them both. The press began picking up on the shift. Not in bold headlines yet, but in speculative columns and industry newsletters. Fashion insiders whispered about the James Project, unsure if it was real, worried that it might be. Because if he succeeded, if someone like him could redefine what it meant to belong in luxury, then every other gate would start to wobble. Every other door would have to answer a simple question. Who are you keeping out? And why? The revolution wasn't coming with noise. It was coming with design, with intention, with dignity. And this time, it wouldn't knock. It would open the door itself. In a quiet corner of Los Angeles, where the city gave way to winding roads and privacy gates, Gloria James stood at her kitchen counter stirring a cup of tea she'd forgotten she'd made. The TV in the background played softly, some morning segment about fashion trends and holiday sales. But she wasn't listening. Her phone buzzed occasionally on the counter. Texts, headlines, well-meaning friends asking if the stories were true. She hadn't answered any of them. Not yet. The truth sat in her chest like a weight she was used to carrying. This wasn't the first time she'd been dismissed, and she had no illusions it would be the last. You don't grow up the way she did, single mother by 19, raising a son in neighborhoods the world forgets, without building calluses where most people carry their pride. But this was different, because this time, it wasn't just about her. She had only mentioned the incident to LeBron because he asked, because he could always tell when something was off. She hadn't meant to make it bigger than it was. She didn't want to cause a scene, didn't want her name in headlines. She was still the same woman who'd scraped together rent, who'd ironed her son's uniforms and prayed over him before school. She didn't need validation from a glass storefront. Still, what stayed with her wasn't the man at the door. It was the way it reminded her how quickly the world decided who mattered, and how often that decision had nothing to do with kindness, or grace, or worth. She picked up her tea, now lukewarm, and walked to the window overlooking the quiet street. The sun was climbing higher, casting long gold lines across the sidewalk. Across town, she knew her son was already in motion. The texts had started yesterday. Brief, direct, like breadcrumbs leading toward something larger. "Are you home tomorrow? Don't book anything next weekend. I've got something I want you to see." She hadn't pressed. He would tell her when he was ready. That was how he moved, not with panic but with purpose. She had seen that drive since he was a boy. When the world saw a skinny kid with a single mom, he saw something else. Possibility, responsibility, the need to build something no one could take from them. And that's what worried her. Because when LeBron got quiet like this, focused like this, he wasn't just planning, he was promising. She thought back to the moments they didn't talk about. The nights she came home with hands too sore to hold a fork, and he massaged her knuckles in silence. The mornings they ate cereal with water because milk had run out 3 days earlier. The time she'd come home from work, exhausted, to find him on the floor with a notebook and a plan to buy you a house, so nice you won't ever have to apologize for how we live again. He meant it then, and he meant it now. She sighed softly and turned from the window as her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a headline or a question. It was a message from her son. "Don't read the noise, just trust me." She didn't need to reply. He knew she would. Across the city, LeBron sat at a long glass table, sunlight spilling across mood boards and architectural renderings. He hadn't slept much, but it didn't show. His team was buzzing around him, emails flying, calls happening in other rooms. But he stayed still, his eyes locked on a single image. A concept sketch of the entrance. Double doors. Wide. Open. No security stand. No cold glass wall separating the curious from the invited. Just space. Just light. He didn't need velvet ropes. He needed a place where his mother, and every mother like her, could walk through the front door and feel like the space was already theirs. Not because of money, but because of who they are. Dignity. That was the foundation, not just of the store, of the movement. He didn't want revenge. He didn't want to tear down Luxor or shame a man in a suit for one terrible moment. That wasn't strength. Strength was building something better. Strength was Gloria James, and he was her son. The next evening, Gloria James sat across from her son in a quiet corner of his home. The lights dimmed, the world outside hushed in twilight. It was rare to get him to sit still like this. No cameras, no team, no buzz of a phone lighting up with calls from 3 time zones at once. Just the two of them. A mother, a son, a moment. LeBron leaned back into the couch, one hand resting on the arm, the other holding a glass of water he hadn't touched. He wasn't fidgeting, but he wasn't relaxed either. "Tell me everything that happened, Mom," he said gently but firmly. Not as a request, as a need. Gloria had been waiting for that. Not the command, but the readiness. She knew her son, knew how his mind worked. He didn't move until he had the full picture, until the pieces fit together in his head. And once they did, nothing could stop him. So she took a breath, not to center herself. She was already centered. She just didn't want to get lost in the memory. She wanted to hand it to him clearly, piece by piece. "It was around 11 in the morning," she began. "I'd had breakfast at that little cafe you told me about. Honeybees, the one with the fresh jam." LeBron gave a small nod. He knew it. "I walked around for a while, just enjoying the day. Wasn't even planning to buy anything. But when I passed Luxor, I thought, why not? It was my birthday. I'd never even been inside before, but I'd heard of it. Saw it in a magazine once. Looked beautiful." She paused, not for drama, but because the next part came with a familiar ache. Not sharp, not fresh, just tired. There was a man at the door, well-dressed, the kind that looks you up and down before you even say hello. I smiled, told him I wanted to look around. I even said it was my birthday. LeBron's jaw tightened just slightly. He didn't smile back. Said they were appointment only. But I saw people inside, Bron. Young couple near the jewelry, a woman drinking champagne. Nobody looked rushed. Nobody looked like they had a calendar invite. She folded her hands in her lap. I pointed that out to him, gently. I said, they just walked in. And he said they were special clients, that I should maybe try a more relaxed store around the corner, somewhere more suited to my style. Her voice was steady, her back straight, but in her eyes, something flickered. Not pain, not sadness, disappointment, the kind that came from realizing the rules hadn't really changed. LeBron didn't interrupt, but his fingers curled into a fist on the armrest. I didn't argue, she continued. Didn't ask to speak to anyone. I just said thank you and walked away. LeBron exhaled slowly, forcing the breath from his chest. That's it? He asked, voice low. That's it, she nodded. I didn't even tell you right away because I didn't want to ruin the day. But it stuck with me, not because of him, but because it reminded me how fast people can make you feel invisible. LeBron looked at her for a long moment. You know what makes me the angriest? He said finally. She raised an eyebrow, waiting. That he thought you were nobody. That he thought he could look at you, and decide in a second that you didn't belong. That you weren't worth stepping aside for. That you should be somewhere else. Gloria smiled softly. Bron, he didn't know who I was. That's the point, he shot back. He didn't need to know who you were to treat you with respect. That's what kills me. Because if he'd known your name, known who your son was, I guarantee you that door would have opened wide. But you didn't need a name to deserve dignity. You were already worthy the second you showed up. He stood then, too restless to sit. All my life, he said, pacing slowly, I've been trying to make sure you never felt like that again. That you'd never be in a room where someone made you feel less than. I thought I'd built enough, done enough. But that moment showed me I still have work to do. She rose too, placing a hand gently on his arm. You've done more than enough, she said. But LeBron shook his head. Now I've started. He looked at her, not with fury, but with a calm, burning clarity. The same look he had before Game 7s, before he took the last shot. I'm going to make sure no woman like you ever stands outside a door like that again, he said. Not quietly, not alone. And in that moment, Gloria knew. He meant it. Every word. The conference room in LeBron's downtown LA office wasn't flashy. Not in the usual sense. No massive chandeliers or gold accents. Just clean lines, matte finishes, and windows that swallowed sunlight whole. But the energy inside? That was where the power sat. Around the table were some of the sharpest minds in branding, architecture, social impact, and luxury retail. Most of them had never been in the same room together. Most had never even worked on the same kind of project. That was intentional, because this wasn't a usual project. LeBron sat at the head of the table, hands steepled in front of him, listening. Always listening first. His presence was quiet, but it filled the space the way music fills a stadium during the national anthem. Low, steady, reverent. He had called the meeting just 3 days after his conversation with his mother. Just 3 days after the story of what didn't happen at Luxor went viral without anyone from his camp needing to confirm a thing. He didn't have to point fingers. The internet had already connected the dots. Now he was connecting the next ones. Luxury has never been the problem, he said, breaking the quiet. Exclusion is. A beat passed, then nods. People leaned forward, pens touched paper, fingers tapped quietly on keyboards. I'm not trying to make something cheaper. I'm not trying to dumb anything down. That's not respect, he said, glancing around the table. I want this to feel elevated, but accessible, dignified. A place that's still aspirational, but not judgmental, where anyone who walks in the door doesn't feel like they need to justify their presence. His voice didn't rise. It never had to. I don't want apologies. I want architecture. I want design that speaks without words, a space that invites, not one that filters. I want a door that doesn't assume who's walking through it. His team exchanged glances. One of the architects, a woman who had designed showrooms for some of the biggest fashion houses in the world, nodded slowly. You're talking about spatial equality? She said. You want the room to treat everyone like they matter the second they enter it? LeBron gave a half smile. Exactly. A marketing executive spoke next, her tone cautious but intrigued. And the clientele? Who do we see walking in on day one? Everyone, LeBron answered without missing a beat. From a high school teacher who's never been inside a luxury boutique to a CEO who's used to exclusivity. And they're going to shop in the same space. No back room for the special ones. No side entrance for the community collection. Same experience, same welcome, same respect. He turned to another associate. I want partnerships with designers who get that, who care more about craftsmanship than clout. People who understand that beauty doesn't need to be reserved for people with platinum cards and paparazzi followers. Another person leaned in. Are we talking about a pop-up? A flagship? What kind of footprint are we envisioning? LeBron paused, thoughtful. Not just a flagship, a foundation. Something that says, this is the future of luxury. One store, one statement. Then we expand. But we do it right. He stood then, not dramatically, but with intent. Walked over to the window where the skyline glowed like ambition under a setting sun. I've been playing this game since I was 16. The one where you walk into rooms you weren't supposed to be in. The one where you carry every person who looks like you on your shoulders, hoping you don't mess it up so they get their shot next. He turned, eyes steady. This time, I'm not walking into a room. I'm building one. Silence. Then applause. Not loud, not performative, just real. The kind that meant everyone in the room understood what they were about to be part of. LeBron sat back down, calm as ever. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to rush. Because when the king makes a play, he doesn't just move fast. He moves right. And this time, the court was made of glass and steel, and the whole world was watching. The envelope came in the late morning, hand-delivered by a young woman in a slate-gray suit who spoke with the kind of clipped professionalism that made you wonder if she was security, legal, or both. For Mrs. Gloria James, she said with a small nod. Gloria took it from her carefully, fingertips brushing the heavy cardstock. There was no logo on the outside, no return address, just her name, in gold-embossed lettering that shimmered slightly in the light. She waited until the woman was gone, already moving on to the next stop perhaps, before she turned and stepped back into her living room. She didn't sit right away, just stood there, the envelope resting in her hand like it weighed more than it should have. She didn't need to open it to know where it came from. It had his fingerprints all over it. Still, she walked over to the table and carefully peeled the flap open. Inside was a single invitation card, thick and soft at the edges, the kind you didn't throw away after reading. You are cordially invited to a private unveiling. Saturday, 7 p.m. Melrose District. Los Angeles formal attire requested no brand, no explanation. Just a line printed in smaller type at the bottom. A celebration of excellence, dignity, and inclusion. She read it twice, then again. LeBron hadn't mentioned anything about this, not in their last phone call, not in the texts he'd sent her the day before, one of them asking if she had any plans this Saturday. She hadn't thought anything of it at the time. But now? Now she felt something stir in her chest. Not nerves, not even curiosity. It was something deeper, a kind of knowing. He was up to something, and it wasn't small. She placed the card on the table and stared at it for a long moment. In all her years, Gloria James had never needed an invitation to walk through a door. But this one wasn't about permission. It was about something else entirely. It was about intent. That same afternoon, across the city, LeBron stood on a wide platform inside a space that was still humming with final touches. The floor was polished concrete, the ceilings high and open, with beams of exposed wood and steel. It was part gallery, part boutique, part sanctuary. The team was moving quickly, installing lighting, adjusting displays, double-checking sightlines and flow. Each piece of the space had been chosen with care. Soft edges, clean tones, no loud branding, no heavy-handed symbolism, just elegance, just calm, just welcome. He watched it all in silence for a moment, arms crossed. Then he walked over to the central display near the entrance. Just a pedestal for now. Tomorrow, it would hold a single item from the Premier collection. A handcrafted leather bag with subtle stitching and no external label. Designed by a black woman who grew up 5 miles from where his mother once skipped dinner so he could eat. He ran his hand over the pedestal. It was smooth, made from reclaimed wood. Strong, quiet, just like her. Theo, his longtime assistant, walked up beside him, tablet in hand. "Invites are out, including your mom's," he said. LeBron nodded. "Did she say anything?" "Nope, not yet." "She will," LeBron said, the corner of his mouth lifting. "She always knows when something's coming. She just lets me think I'm being sneaky." Theo grinned. "Well, you've got 48 hours until the whole city finds out what you've been building." LeBron looked around again, at the way the space felt open, alive, full of promise. "I'm not building a store," he said quietly. "I'm building a standard." And that night, in her quiet house, Gloria James sat beside the invitation. She hadn't picked out a dress yet. She hadn't called her son to ask what exactly this was all about. She didn't need to, because she'd raised him. And if LeBron James had sent her an invitation to walk through a door, this time, there would be no one telling her she didn't belong, because this time, he built the door himself. The red carpet rolled out just before dusk. Not the typical paparazzi-stained carpet with velvet ropes and shouty photographers, but one designed with intention. It was deep burgundy, almost the color of aged wine, with gold stitching running along its edges that read, in small, barely there letters, "You belong here." That was the first clue. The building itself looked the same on the outside. Luxor's flagship boutique in the Melrose district had always been a statement of quiet opulence. Tall glass panels, a minimalist logo etched in silver. The kind of place you passed by without thinking unless you were already someone. It had that weight to it, the invisible force field of exclusive. But tonight, it felt different. Not softened exactly, but widened, warmer. The crowd gathering outside reflected that change. Yes, the usual figures were there. Celebrities, stylists, influencers with phones in their hands, and designer heels clicking on the pavement. But standing right alongside them were school principals and nurses in second-hand blazers. Non-profit directors in dresses they bought on sale. Fathers holding their daughters' hands, dressed in Sunday suits because tonight they'd been invited too. Inside, the store glowed. No longer just a showroom for wealth, it had transformed into something more human. High ceilings still soared above the guests, and the walls still shimmered with curated light. But now, the displays were lower, closer. The space breathed. Mannequins no longer wore icy expressions.
They stood beside mirrors etched with quiet affirmations. You are seen. You are worthy. You are already enough. In the center of the room stood a circle of open seating. No barricades, no private lounges tucked behind curtains. It was a place for conversation, not separation. For the first time, Luxor felt like it wasn't holding its breath. At exactly 7 p.m., the music softened. The lights dimmed to a honeyed glow, and the room turned, almost as one, as the double doors opened once again. Gloria James stepped through them. She moved with the grace of someone who had nothing to prove. No diamonds, no entourage, just a simple, elegant black dress that hugged her frame like it was made for the moment. Her silver earrings caught the light with every step. Her smile, calm and full of knowing, was brighter than anything she wore. Vincent, the doorman who once stood between her and this space, was there too, but not at the door. Tonight, he stood near the welcome table, hands folded gently in front of him, waiting. When Gloria approached, their eyes met. He didn't look away. "Mrs. James," he said, voice steady but soft. "Welcome to Luxor. It's an honor to have you." She looked at him for just a beat longer than necessary. Not with scorn, not even with irony, just clarity. Then she nodded. "Thank you," she said, and walked inside. The room broke into applause. Not because she was famous, not because she was being honored, but because everyone in that room knew what she represented, knew what it meant for her to be there, not as someone's guest, but as the reason the doors opened wider tonight. And then, from the far side of the store, another figure stepped into the light. LeBron. He wore a charcoal suit, tailored, sharp, but understated. His presence, as always, filled the space without demanding it. He walked straight to his mother, kissed her on the cheek, and then turned to face the crowd. "Thank you all for coming," he said, no mic needed. His voice carried. "I'm not going to talk long, because this moment doesn't belong to me." He looked around, sweeping the room with his gaze. "It belongs to every person who's ever stood outside a place like this and wondered if they were welcome. It belongs to every mother who sacrificed her own comfort so her kids could have more. It belongs to the ones who don't always get a second look, unless they're standing beside someone with a name." He turned to his mom, eyes soft. "I watched my mother get turned away from this store. Not because she did anything wrong, but because someone decided she didn't look like she belonged. So we changed the store, not to prove a point, to keep a promise." There was no applause yet, just silence, the kind that holds a room still. "From today forward," he continued, "Luxor is still about beauty, still about quality. But now, it's also about dignity. And no one gets judged by the price tag on their outfit before they're let through the door." Then, quietly, he added, "Tonight is for her." He gestured to his mother. And with that, the music swelled again. Soft, slow, timeless. Gloria took her son's arm, and together they walked through the store she had once been denied. Not as guests, but as owners of the moment, and of the future it had just begun to shape. The morning after the grand reopening, the energy inside Luxor was unlike anything the staff had ever felt. Gone was the tension that used to hang like humidity in the air, an invisible pressure that weighed down smiles and measured politeness with a scale no one ever dared question. Something had shifted, and not just in the decor or the clientele. It was in the people themselves. Vincent arrived first. He hadn't been early in years. He used to time his arrival down to the minute, never a step ahead of the luxury clockwork that had defined his role. polished shoes, tailored suit, clipboard tucked discreetly under his arm. But today he walked through the employee entrance with something else. Humility. Still polished, still dressed to perfection, but lighter, like a layer of armor had finally been set down. He moved through the hallway without speaking until he reached the new welcome lounge, a space that hadn't existed before. It was simple, elegant, and meant for guests who needed a moment to breathe, or who just didn't want to be judged the second they stepped inside. He paused there, remembering. Not a year ago, he would have dismissed the very idea. A welcome lounge? In a luxury store? Why not just hand out coupons and call it a mall? But then, he saw her face. Gloria James. Not angry, not loud, just quietly disappointed. That look haunted him more than any confrontation ever could. She hadn't asked for anything, and that somehow made it worse. Now, he stood by the lounge not as a barrier, but as a guide. "Good morning," came a familiar voice. Zara, one of the associates, stood at the top of the grand stairwell, tablet in hand. She was smiling, not the forced, rehearsed kind, but one that came from something real. "Morning," Vincent said. Then, after a pause, "Beautiful turnout last night." "More than beautiful," she said, stepping down toward him. It felt different. They both knew what she meant. Last night, for the first time, Luxor hadn't felt like a fortress. It had felt like a conversation. And today, that spirit lingered. In the back rooms, associates who used to whisper judgments behind mirrored panels were now talking about customers' stories instead of their shoes. Margot, a senior stylist, spent her break showing a junior team member how to recognize fabrics by feel. Not for efficiency, but to better serve clients who might not know how to ask for what they want. "Did you see the woman who came in this morning?" Zara asked Vincent. "School teacher from Long Beach. She came early just to walk through. Didn't even buy anything." Vincent nodded. "I offered her a coffee. We talked for 10 minutes. She said she's been saving up for something nice just for herself." He hesitated, then added, 2 months ago I would have redirected her to another store." Zara didn't say anything right away. She didn't need to. "You know what she said before she left?" he continued. "She said, 'I didn't buy anything today, but this is the first time I've felt like I could.'" That landed like a stone dropped gently into still water. All around the store, the transformation was unfolding in real time. The community collection on the upper floor was bustling, not chaotic, not overcrowded, just alive. Nurses browsed silk scarves with the same care and attention usually reserved for celebrities. A young social worker tried on sunglasses in front of a mirror etched with the phrase, "You deserve this." And every customer, regardless of title or background, was welcomed the same way. Zara pulled out her tablet and opened a feedback form from that morning. It was filled with notes. Dozens already. "I think the Dignity Committee's going to need a bigger team," she said with a laugh. Vincent raised an eyebrow. "You still want me involved?" Zara looked at him seriously. "You were part of the problem, that's true. But you're also part of the story now. And people are watching how you show up next." He nodded slowly. "Then I'm in." Later that afternoon, LeBron made an unannounced visit. He didn't speak to customers, didn't hold court. He just walked the floor, watching, listening. At one point, he stood by the entrance and watched Vincent welcome a man in work boots and a faded button-down. There was no hesitation, no second glance. Just, "Welcome to Luxor, sir. Can I help you find anything?" That was enough. That was the win. Because a true transformation doesn't happen in ribbon cuttings or headlines. It happens in habits, in the way people treat each other when no one's watching. And now, at Luxor, Everyone belonged on both sides of the door. The first thing people noticed when they stepped onto the second floor of the new Luxor wasn't the products. It wasn't the soft lighting, the curated music, or the way the marble underfoot seemed to hum with possibility. It was the feeling, a kind of hush, but not the kind that warned you to stay quiet. This wasn't the stifled silence of traditional luxury, where footsteps felt too loud and glances too long. This was the hush of reverence, like entering a space that respected you before you even said a word. This was the Crown Collection. It was the heartbeat of the store, nestled in an airy skylit mezzanine that overlooked the main floor. The design was intentional, open enough to feel included, elevated enough to feel honored. There were no barriers, no signs declaring premium or exclusive. Just space. Beautiful, unhurried space. The collection itself was small by design. Every piece told a story. There were leather satchels, made by formerly incarcerated artisans who now ran their own design house. A line of trench coats stitched in Detroit by a cooperative of single mothers. Jewelry designed by a young Nigerian artist who had once been told her work was too ethnic for the European market. Every label was accompanied by a small placard, not with prices first, but with purpose. Zara stood at the edge of the room, watching quietly as a woman in her late 50s ran her fingers along a display of scarves dyed with plant-based pigments. The woman wore worn sneakers, a neat blouse, and a look of wonder. "I can't believe I'm standing here," the woman said softly, not to anyone in particular. Zara stepped forward. "Welcome to the Crown Collection," she said gently. "Would you like to try anything on?" The woman looked up, a little startled, as if she'd been waiting for someone to come tell her she didn't belong. "I'm not sure I can afford anything," she said with a laugh that tried to sound casual. "I just wanted to see it with my own eyes." "That's more than enough," Zara replied. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be." The woman's eyes glistened. She nodded and turned back to the scarves, touching them with a kind of reverence Zara recognized. That moment, small as it was the very reason this space existed. The Crown Collection wasn't about discounts or charity. It wasn't a PR move or a feel-good corner of the store. It was luxury, plain and simple, but reimagined, reframed, reclaimed. It was beauty without judgment, craftsmanship without condescension, access without apology. At the entrance to the mezzanine stood a plaque carved from warm walnut wood, its letters burned in gently. For the makers, for the servers, for the builders, the healers, the givers. This is yours. Each item in the collection had a dual pricing system. Standard retail, yes, but also the Crown Access price, available to verified community members. Teachers, nurses, social workers, veterans, first responders. Not a handout, not a markdown, just a gesture of honor. The difference in price? Covered entirely by the May Fund, a foundation seeded by LeBron himself, named after the promise he'd made to his mother and to every person like her. Word of the collection had already begun to spread. Fashion magazines were divided, some praising it as revolutionary, others unsure how to categorize a line that didn't play by the rules. But what mattered most wasn't in the reviews. It was in the faces. A firefighter bought a ring for his wife, something she'd once seen in a magazine but never dared to want. A music teacher selected a silk blouse that made her stand taller. A retired nurse cried quietly while slipping on a pair of gloves made from Italian leather, whispering, "I've never owned anything this nice." And every time the staff offered nothing but the same quiet, steady support. Because here, luxury wasn't reserved, it was restored. Downstairs, LeBron walked through the main floor, flanked by his team, nodding as he passed familiar faces and unfamiliar ones alike. He paused at the base of the stairs to the Crown Collection, looking up, not just at the space, but at the idea it had become. It wasn't just about what was being sold. It was about what was being returned. Dignity, worth, joy. Real luxury, he'd realized, wasn't what you wore. It was how a space made you feel. And for the first time, that feeling was available to everyone. No permission required. At exactly 9:55 a.m., 5 minutes before Luxor's doors opened to the public, the staff gathered near the entrance beneath the soft golden lettering that read, "You belong here." It had become ritual, not mandated, not rehearsed, but understood. Every morning, just before the doors swung open and the day's rhythm began, they came together to remind themselves why they were here, what had changed, and what they were now responsible for guarding. Not merchandise, not image, but dignity. They called it the Gloria Standard. No one wrote it down. No pamphlets or training modules. But everyone knew what it meant. It meant, look people in the eye when you greet them. It meant, never assume based on appearance. It meant, don't wait until someone proves they're worthy. Treat them as if they already are. Because that's how Gloria James had walked through the world, and it's how LeBron had built this store. The man who once turned her away, Vincent, was now the first person guests saw when they arrived. Not because he'd kept his job out of pity, but because he'd earned it back. After months of listening, learning, and most importantly, serving. He'd spent 30 days volunteering at transitional housing centers as part of the staff accountability program LeBron had quietly introduced. It was never meant to be punishment. It was perspective. Vincent now stood a little differently. Not with less pride, but with more purpose. He no longer watched for fashion cues or shopping bags. He watched for people, faces, moments. This morning, he straightened his collar and turned to Zara, who had just joined him at the entrance. "Anything we should prep for?" he asked. Zara checked her notes. "A community group is coming in around 10. Teachers from Compton, first visit, and we've got 2 new Crown Collection guests scheduled for fittings." Vincent nodded. "Got it." The doors opened. And just like that, the day began. The first guest was an older man with a faded ball cap and a button-down that had seen better days. He stepped in cautiously, his eyes scanning the space like he wasn't sure he'd come to the right place. Vincent smiled warmly, stepping forward. "Welcome to Luxor. What brings you in today?" The man hesitated. "Honestly, just looking. My wife saw something about this place on the news. Told me to check it out." Vincent held the door open a little wider, even though he was already inside. "Well, we're glad you did. Take your time. Let me know if I can help." No pressure. No hovering. No suggestion that he belonged somewhere else. That was the Gloria Standard. By mid-morning, the store was full. Not chaotic. Just alive. There were designers discussing custom fittings with Crown Collection clients, while stylists helped first-time shoppers navigate silhouettes and sizing without ever making them feel uninformed. In one corner, a young mother held her toddler on her hip while browsing scarves. A sales associate crouched down, not to sell, but to offer the child a bottle of water. Gloria arrived just after noon. She never announced her visits. But when she walked through the door, everything paused for a second. Not out of obligation, but respect. She had become more than a name. She was the pulse behind the promise. Zara greeted her with a quiet hug. "Come to look around?" "Just checking on my store," Gloria said with a wink. They walked together through the main floor, past displays that now included framed customer stories instead of just mannequins. "This woman here," Zara said, pointing to one of the framed prints, "she's a librarian from Oakland. Said she hadn't bought herself anything new in 15 years. Left here with a silk blazer and a smile that could break glass." Gloria smiled softly. "That's the kind of luxury that matters." At the door, Vincent stood quietly, watching them. When their eyes met, Gloria gave him the smallest nod. Not to forgive him. She didn't owe him that. But to acknowledge the shift, the effort, the work. And he nodded back, a little deeper than before. Because he understood now, luxury without dignity is just costume. But dignity, offered freely, without condition, is the real crown. And thanks to the Gloria standard, every door at Luxor now opened with that truth. It started as a phrase, just something a stylist whispered to a new hire one morning as they stood near the polished glass display of handbags on Luxor's main floor. "Remember," she said gently, smoothing the hem of her black blazer, "we operate by the Gloria standard here." The new hire, young, fresh from a fast fashion chain where speed meant survival, nodded, even though she didn't quite understand yet. But she would. Because by the end of that first day, after watching a nurse try on her first designer heels and a father quietly weep while his teenage daughter was gifted a dress from the Crown collection, she started to feel it too. That current beneath the marble and the mirrored walls. That pulse of something bigger than transactions, bigger than fashion. It was respect, and it had become contagious. The phrase caught on like sunlight across a city skyline. First within Luxor's walls, then in places no one expected. It showed up in customer reviews, slipped into Instagram captions. "I walked in nervous, but they met me with the Gloria standard." It spread through stylist circles and fashion school forums, where the next generation of designers began asking not just how to create luxury, but who it was for. It moved faster than any marketing campaign could have dreamed of. And no one on LeBron's team pushed it. Not officially. Because movements aren't manufactured. They're felt. Gloria herself never asked for her name to be attached to any of this. She didn't want her face on banners or plaques. But when she saw that little phrase etched quietly into the back of the store's employee lanyards, not for customers, but for them, she just shook her head and smiled. "You all give me too much credit," she told Zara one afternoon, as they shared tea in the upstairs lounge. "We don't give you enough," Zara replied. And that was the truth. Because the Gloria standard wasn't about one woman. It was about what she represented. It was about every person who ever walked into a space unsure of how they'd be received. Every person who had stood outside a luxury store, debating whether to go in, not because of prices, but because of perception. Because they'd been made to feel, again and again, that some doors weren't built with them in mind. But now those doors were being rebuilt. Luxury brands that once prided themselves on secrecy began re-evaluating their front-of-house policies. Competitors, once silent, started rethinking their hiring practices, their showroom designs, their language. Words like inclusive and accessible began replacing exclusive and elite on mission statements. Some did it to keep up, others because they felt the shift in their bones. But none of them could deny it anymore. Dignity had become fashionable. Not the performative kind, the real kind. The kind that started with how someone was greeted. The kind that showed up in fitting rooms stocked with a wider range of sizes, in price points designed not to shrink quality, but to expand worth.
The kind that taught salespeople to stop judging based on sneakers or speech patterns. At one point, a boutique in London posted a sign in their front window that read, "We honor the Gloria standard." The photo went viral in less than an hour. Then came the interviews, not just with LeBron, but with staff, with customers, with designers from the Crown collection who'd once been laughed out of meetings but now had wait lists for their work, with Gloria herself, who remained humble but clear. "I didn't build anything," she said once on a morning show, smiling. "My son did that. The team at Luxor did that. I just walked through a door someone told me I couldn't. That's all." And yet, that quiet act, dignified, restrained, unshaken, had opened thousands more. Because when a single standard shifts from expectation to example, it doesn't just improve service. It redefines it. The Gloria standard became more than a whisper in one store. It became a measuring stick, a cultural correction, a call to raise the bar not just in luxury, but in how we treat each other, everywhere. From the corner cafe to the corporate office, from the fashion showroom to the public school hallway, respect had become a revolution. And at its heart was a mother who never asked for attention, only a little kindness at the door. Now, the world was finally holding it open. A year after Gloria James was turned away from a store that decided she didn't belong, the world looked different. Not in the grand, cinematic way. The buildings were still standing, the sidewalk still humming with footsteps, the city still spinning with its usual chaos. But something quieter had changed. A subtle shift in the way people saw each other, in the way doors opened. At Luxor, the bell above the entrance chimed softly each time someone stepped inside. And no one flinched anymore when that someone wasn't dressed in designer from head to toe. No one sized up shoes or handbags or skin. They just smiled and said, "Welcome." On any given day, a retired veteran might shop beside a pop star. A mother on her lunch break might try on a coat in the mirror next to a magazine editor. A high school teacher might share a laugh with a jewelry designer. No one looked out of place. No one felt small. That was the point. The Gloria standard had become more than policy, more than branding. It had become a cultural blueprint, adopted not only in fashion houses, but in places far beyond. Restaurants rewrote their reservation scripts. Boutique hotels started training their concierges differently. Schools, banks, airports, places where power often hovered just out of reach, began to examine how dignity was either extended or denied at the door. It wasn't about changing everything overnight. It was about changing how we saw people, and how we made them feel in spaces that were once designed to exclude them. LeBron never gave a victory speech. He didn't need to. His mother's quiet courage, her calm in the face of condescension, had said more than a press conference ever could. Instead, he kept building. The May Fund expanded. The Crown Collection added new designers from communities once shut out of luxury's gates. And the Gloria standard? It spread. Not because it was pushed, but because it was true. And people know truth when they feel it. One day, as spring rolled into the city, Gloria walked into Luxor unannounced. Not for press, not for a tour, just to visit. A young employee, new maybe in her first week, saw her and smiled. "Mrs. James," she said, eyes wide. "It's such an honor." Gloria smiled, warm and steady. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Jasmine," the girl said. "I'm still learning." Gloria glanced around at the space that had once shut her out, now filled with light, laughter, and possibility. "You're doing just fine, Jasmine," she said gently. "Just remember why we're here." And with that, she turned and walked toward the window,
where a young man was helping his grandmother try on a silk scarf. There was no announcement, no spotlight, just a woman, quietly watching the world catch up to the truth she'd always known. Luxury is not about price. It's about presence. Dignity doesn't need to be earned. It needs to be honored. And sometimes, the most powerful revolution begins not with a protest, but with a mother walking away from a closed door with her head held high. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, share it. Pass it on. Keep the conversation going. Because respect isn't a trend, it's a choice. And we all have the power to hold the door open for someone else. Let's make sure they never doubt they belong.